Welcome back, everybody, to the Miami Marlins franchise here on MLB The Show 23. Today we've got the offseason as we will be entering season number 3 of the series. Before we get started, real quick, today we hit 20,000 subscribers, which is a really exciting milestone. I appreciate all of you guys, whether you've been with the channel for a while or are a newer viewer. I do want to do something special for 20K. I haven't decided exactly what that would be yet, but I do want to do something celebratory for an exciting milestone. But just know the real work is just getting started. In the last episode, we wrapped up the regular season in year number 2. We had our full season recap announcing our candidates for the studs and duds of the year, which of course you guys had the opportunity to vote on. And today we will be revealing the winners for the studs and duds of the year. Overall, I think season 2 was pretty successful for our organization. The big league club ended up going 81-81, perfectly balanced as all things should be, missing out on the playoffs by a few games. The Double-A team made it to the championship series before losing in 4 to the Tennessee Smokies. We had some guys on the Double-A team perform very well, particularly some of our top prospects, such as Woody Landry, Robbie Jones, and Khalil Watson, who were the 3 minor league stud of the year candidates. The Triple-A team was not as successful. We had the worst winning percentage of every single Triple-A team, regardless of league, even worse than the Oakland Athletics Triple-A team, which is pretty sad. It's surprising because we have a lot of talent on the Triple-A roster. I would have thought we would have done better, but unfortunately that was not the case. So let's now reveal our studs and duds of the year, and we will start in the major leagues. The winner of the Stud of the Year vote by a pretty wide margin is going to be our catcher, Nick Fortes. This is very well deserving for Fortes. He won the Stud of the Year last season as well, and this year he took another step up. 27 homers, 83 RBIs. He hit .287 with an .837 OPS and a WAR at 6.2, which was, I believe, 6th or 7th among National League position players. Being the Stud of the Year, all of his attributes will go up by +3, as will his potential. His potential will move from a 79 to an 82, and his overall rating is now an 86. The whole reason why I implemented the Stud of the Year in this series was to give opportunities for guys like Nick Fortes, who play really well, to get big rating boosts. Edward Cabrera ended up getting 2nd place. Cabrera was also a Stud of the Year finalist last year, and he had an even better season this year. He threw more innings, he allowed basically the same amount of hits, less runs, basically the same homers, less walks, which is really impressive, and his strikeout rate was really good. He had a sub-3 ERA, a whip at 1.26, and a WAR at 2.7. He's going to move up by 2, so he will now be an 85 overall entering his age 26 season. And look at some of these rating boosts, particularly +12 in walks per 9, and his potential will move up from a 92 to a 94. Edward Cabrera's development in this series has been really fun, and he is really turning into a young star in our rotation, along with Sandy Alcantara. Charles LeBlanc ended up getting 3rd place, which wasn't really a surprise. He wasn't as good as those other guys. But in comparison to the expectations we had for LeBlanc going into the season, along with his ratings, he was quite impressive. A 2.4 WAR for basically a platoon player is really, really good. He's a very reliable and steady player, and thus his rating will go up by 1. He actually regressed during the season, so it'll go back up to a 67 where it initially was, and his potential will go up by 1. As for our Major League Dud of the Year, the loser of the award, again unsurprisingly, Harrison Bader in the outfield. We signed Bader to a 2-year, $19 million contract last offseason, and he was pretty disappointing, particularly at the plate. He hit .211, OPS at 644, only 10 homers. I will say he did play better offensively as the year went along. He did have a positive WAR at 1.5, largely because of his phenomenal Gold Glove level defense. But offensively, he was a liability the entire season, and it was hard to keep him in the field, even with his great defense. So his rating and potential will both go down by 3. Bader's still a good player, but this is certainly a big hit for him. We have a mutual team and player option on him for $9.5 million this offseason, which you would think probably ends up getting declined. Xavier Edwards ended up getting 2nd for the dud of the year. He didn't play a ton in the major league, so you could make the argument it could have been a little bit unfair to put him on the ballot, But, I mean, he was really bad. He had 4 extra base hits and over 100 at-bats, 575 OPS, negative WAR, a walk rate at 5, a K rate at 35. I mean, that's just not good at all. And it's not like he really lit the world on fire in AAA either. I was really encouraged by his development last season, but this year he really took a step back. So he will go down by 2 in rating, and his potential will go down from a B to a high C. Reynaldo Lopez will end up getting 3rd place. In a vacuum, Lopez didn't necessarily have a bad season. He had a sub-4 ERA and a sub-1.2 WHIP, but contrary to the expectations that we had for him going into the season, he was disappointing. Ever since he's become a full-time reliever with the White Sox, he has been dominant. Last year, he had a 2.17 ERA. His WAR has been sub-1 since 2020, and for most of the year, his numbers were a lot worse. I will say he did play better in September, but it was not enough to keep him off the list, so he will go down by 1 in his rating. Lopez was a guy we signed last year. He's still under contract for around $5 million of a player option, which I would expect he will ultimately accept. His potential went down by 1 as well. So those are our Major League studs and duds of the year. Let's take a look now at the minor league winners and losers. So unsurprisingly, the stud of the year ended up being first baseman Woody Landry. He was our top draft pick of the series back in Season 1, and he shattered expectations. He's a 76 overall, and that's without the ratings boost. His numbers this year were very impressive at the AA level. 28 homers, 105 RBIs, 317 average, OPS above 1,000, nearly the same amount of walks as he did strikeouts. He had a 5.7 WAR, which was higher than any minor leaguer in all of minor league baseball. He led the AA Southern League in just about every important offensive statistic. This includes batting average, hits, doubles. He was pretty high up in triples, which is impressive for a first baseman. He led in homers and RBIs by a lot. He led in runs by a lot as well, but not by as much because he drove in Khalil Watson so many times. He was top 10 in stolen bases, first in walks, first in on base, first in slugging, first in OPS by over 200, which is just absurd. Woody Landry was the best offensive player, maybe the best player, period, in minor league baseball. So he is now a 79 overall, which is ridiculous for a 19-year-old. His potential will also go up by 3. When we drafted him, I think he had 93 potential. It went up by 3 during the season. So we're going to add 3 more. He now has 99 potential. He's a 99 potential, 79 overall player at 19 years old. So he's basically a generational prospect who we've added to the farm system. The one thing I really want to work with him in the offseason is his batting mechanics. His batting stance is ugly. His footwork is pretty bad. So if we can improve that, I think he'll be ready to be an everyday major leaguer on opening day next year. Khalil Watson ended up getting 2nd place, which was very well deserved. He was okay in Season 1 at the AA level, but this year he really took a leap, particularly his power. He only had 1 homer last year. This year he had 13, while still hitting for a good 270 average and a 775 OPS, which was one of the highest marks in the AA Southern League. He had a 2.7 WAR and played pretty good defense, so his rating will go up by 2. He is now a 70. His potential will go up by 2 as well. He will most likely start next year at the AAA level. Robbie Jones, our 2nd-round pick last year, ended up getting 3rd. Jones is a big-time prospect who I think can eventually be an ace one day, and he certainly looked like it for the AA team. 182 innings pitched. The strikeouts are a little bit low, but every other number is really good. He allowed single-digit homers, didn't allow a lot of walks, didn't allow a lot of hits, 4.5 WAR, which was one of the highest for pitchers in all of minor league baseball. So his rating will go up by 1, as will his potential. His potential went up by 1 during the season, so it'll get a net increase of +2. As for the minor league duds of the year, Jose Gerardo ended up being the loser of the award by a wide margin. Going into the series, Gerardo was a prospect I was pretty excited about, and he was pretty good in season number 1, but this year he really took a step back. He hits for good power, and his 12 home runs is not bad, but every other statistic is pretty terrible. He had a 210 average, 254 on base, sub 600 OPS, which is just a total disaster. He only walked 20 times, yet he struck out 111 times. He had a WAR of negative 2.4, which was 3rd worst amongst all position players in all of AA. So that's quite terrible. His rating will go down by 3. He is now a 64 overall. And similarly with Woody Landry's potential going up during the year, Gerardo's potential was already going down, and it'll go down an additional -3. Yiddy Cape ended up being second place for the AA or minor league dud of the year. Cape's numbers aren't like terrible in a vacuum. He hit 242, 3 homers, and 300 at-bats. His OPS was 667. He had a positive WAR. It's not like he was awful, but he started the year in AAA. He ended the year off as a very mediocre AA player. So his overall projection took a pretty big hit. So he will go down by 2 to a 66, basically losing an entire year of development. His potential will go down as well, which also really is not ideal since we've added Ronald Landino and Gavin Lux at shortstop within the past year. Joel Beltran ends up getting 3rd place. He was our competitive balance round A pick last year, which is basically a first-round selection. And he was a little bit disappointing. His contact is not good. We knew going into the year it was not good. I could have lived with somewhere between 240 to 260, but he hit 219, which was not great. He hit 11 homers, which isn't terrible, but if the batting average is going to be that low, I would have hoped for the home runs to be a little bit higher. 284 on base, 637 OPS. He did play pretty good defense behind the dish, and he had a positive WAR. But for being a 22-year-old, 4-year college player, I would have expected a little bit more out of him. So his potential and rating will go down by 1. I'm still optimistic about his future, but with how good of a season Nick Fortes is coming off, Fortes is going to realistically keep that catcher spot for quite a while. So those are our studs and duds of the year. Let me know if you agree or disagree with how the vote ended up going down below in the comment section. So with that, we will now officially enter the offseason here for season number 2, and we will start off with retirements. We would have one player in the organization call it a career, and that ended up being super utility infielder Cody Bohannock, who has been with the minor league teams. I think having super utility guys like him is good to have in the system, so I was a little bit upset to see him go. We had a bunch of other notable players around the rest of baseball retire. Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander both retired together with the Mets, 2 guys who certainly should eventually be Hall of Famers. And we had a bunch of other notable former major leaguers. There's Madison Bumgarner. Miguel Cabrera, the former Miami Marlin, also retired as well in free agency. Some other notable names include Aroldis Chapman, Johnny Cueto, former Marlin, Cody Dickerson, another former Marlin, Josh Donaldson, Sean Doolittle, Jairus Familia, Mike Moustakas, Hyun-Jin Ryu, Carlos Santana, Speedy D Strange Gordon, another former Marlin, and then Justin Upton. We would have 2 players enter the Hall of Fame class with Max Scherzer and Miguel Cabrera, both very well deserved, but how does Justin Verlander not make it? I don't get that at all. So that'll bring us into the offseason itself with exclusive free agent negotiations and negotiating with the staff. We have 4 exclusive free agents, and that starts with Harrison Bader, who, of course, was our dud of the year. We have a team and player option for $9.5 million, and we are going to decline it, which means he is officially a free agent. He was not good for us this year. We have a lot of guys I like in the outfield. I think we'd be better off moving on and not bringing him back. So let's get an F in the chat for the Master Bader. Jacob Stallings, the backup catcher, also had a team option. Having a solid veteran backup catcher is important, but with Nick Fortes' development, he's the full-time everyday guy now, so I don't think it would be worth paying Stallings what we are. I think we can get a cheaper, younger, and better option at backup catcher. Rowdy Tellez is an interesting one. We traded for him last offseason. He was as expected. I wish the home run number was a little bit higher, but overall he was pretty solid. I still would like to have my starting first baseman have a higher OPS than 711. He is pretty cheap, and I would be willing to bring him back if we didn't already have Woody Landry on the roster. I'm expecting Woody Landry to be the opening day first baseman next year, so because of that, there's really no reason to keep Rowdy Tellez around. So I think we're going to let him go. We're probably going to sign a cheaper, maybe worse veteran first baseman in free agency in case Woody Landry is not ready for the big leagues. And then we've got Wandy Peralta. We signed him to a 1-year deal last year. He was fine out of the bullpen as a lefty. I think we're going to look to get younger in the pen and ultimately choose to let him go. So we're not going to bring back any of those guys. As we now take a look at the staff, we've got a few open spots, and we're going to open up another one here. I kind of find it funny that our hitting coach's name is Woody, and our soon-to-be best hitter is also named Woody, but whatever. We're going to fire Mel Stottlemyre Jr., the pitching coach. I like how he's been able to develop Edward Cabrera into a great player, but some of the other pitchers like Trevor Rogers, Yuri Perez, Sixto Sanchez, Jesus Luzardo, those guys haven't really developed at the speed that I would have hoped. We're going to bring Skip Shoemaker back as the manager. I think he's done a pretty good job, so I don't see any reason to get a new manager. We're going to offer him a 2-year extension. Geraldo Tenney, we're going to look at him to be our new pitching coach. He's an interesting young mind. He's only 36 years old, so I think he'll be able to grow with our organization. We're going to bring back Tommy Lasorda as our third base coach. Obviously, he is not 55. He is actually dead, which is why it's funny that he is going to be coaching for us. And then I really like Roman Schaefer to be our farm director. I really like that +3 power. It's a little bit challenging to develop good power hitters in the farm system in this game. So I think he would be a good guy to ultimately get. All right, let's simulate into free agency now. Skip Shoemaker is back. Reynaldo Lopez is back. He unsurprisingly accepts his player option. Geraldo Tenney is now our pitching coach. Roman Schaefer does not accept our offer to be the farm director. Instead, he will take the same role with the Nationals. That's pretty unfortunate. I actually really wanted him quite a bit as we make it to the fun part of the offseason. And this, of course, is where free agency comes in. And as you can see, there's a lot of really good free agents in this year's class. We're going to do some of the more boring stuff first. We also have to hire a new farm director because the guy we wanted did not accept. So we're going to look at Hayden Jean. He's a little bit worse, but he does have that +3 power, which I think is really important. We currently have 7 open spots on the 40-man roster. Obviously, we got to leave some spots open for free agency or guys that we trade for. But we're going to put Woody Landry there now because I'm going to do it eventually, so I might as well just get it over with. Next up, we're going to go through arbitration. I decided to offer everybody who is eligible their arbitration, but I did not offer anybody here a long-term contract extension, so nothing too exciting here. That'll bring us to the tendering contract stage, which is for everybody else in the organization, which is basically like 80% of the players. Again, we didn't offer anybody here a long-term extension. I don't think Jacob Berry and Yuri Perez have quite proved themselves yet, and we can't offer Woody Landry yet because I probably would have given the opportunity. We're letting go of a couple older, not as good minor leaguers, but for the most part, we're going to bring all of the minor leaguers and organizational depth back. So that'll bring us to free agency, and this free agency class is as good as it gets. Juan Soto, Pete Alonso, Corbin Burns, Shane Bieber, Jose Altuve, pitchers galore. My goodness, there's so many starting pitchers here who are really, really good players. So I want to be smart here in free agency. Obviously, it would be fun to sign like a Juan Soto or a Pete Alonso to completely ignite this lineup. But we are the Miami Marlins. This is not an organization who historically goes out and signs a bunch of big-name free agents. That doesn't mean we're not going to spend, but realistically, we don't have the resources to spend a whole ton of money at this stage in the rebuild. Maybe in a few years when we start winning is when we can go after a super big-name free agent. So as I look at the lineup, we do have a couple holes. Realistically, Woody Landry will play first base, but we do have another spot open, which can really be just about any position, in my opinion, so we don't really have to limit ourselves. That spot could always go to Charles LeBlanc or anyone in the farm system, but I would like to add another proven veteran. I would especially like it to be someone who hits lefties well. I've prioritized having guys in the organization who hit righties really well because there's a lot more right-handed pitchers than there are lefties. Because of that, that has really hurt us against lefties. So I want to find veterans in free agency who hit lefties really well. And lucky for us, there are a lot of good options. Tim Anderson's a guy who really stuck out. His ratings against lefties are very impressive. He's had probably his 2 most consistent seasons with the White Sox. He's hit for good power. He's hit for decent enough average. He's gotten pretty high WARs. I don't really want to take away from Luis Arraez or Gavin Lux's playing time, but Anderson would be a good fit. I think Anthony Santander would also be a pretty good fit. He's a switch-hitting outfielder who hits for good contact and good power. He's been a little bit inconsistent over the last few years, but this season he kind of put it all together. 812 OPS, positive WAR, barely. He hit nearly 30 homers, and he hit 272. So I think he could be a solid and somewhat cheap addition. If we want to splurge a little bit, Tyler O'Neill is somebody who could be an option. He's a lot more expensive than a lot of the other guys I'm looking at. So in terms of overall value, he might not really be worth it. But he's an all-around good player. He hits for good average, decent enough OPS, very high WAR. He's gotten a total of 10.1 WAR over the last 2 seasons compared to Anthony Santander, whose WAR over the last 2 years is negative. Garrett Cooper could be an interesting one. We had him on the roster in Season 1. We traded him at the deadline to Chicago. He signed with the Angels, and my goodness, was he good last year, and that was after a really good Season 1. He's been very good in this series, and I really wouldn't mind bringing him back because he's a pretty good player. Gleyber Torres with the Yankees is another good option. 99 power against lefties, that really intrigues me. He's another slightly more expensive option like Tyler O'Neill, but he's only 28 years old. He's still getting better. I think he could be a good option. Of the guys we named, I think it would make more sense to go after one of the cheaper options. I want to avoid being cheap in this series, but at the same time, we have to be realistic in the sense that at this stage of the rebuild, the team's not going to be handing out big deals. So I think it would make the most sense to go after a guy like Anthony Santander. We're going to give him a 2-year deal for $12 million. I think that's a lot better value than giving somebody like Tyler O'Neill a $70 million deal. Along with that, we really got to improve the bench. Our bench, other than Charles LeBlanc, is pretty horrific. We need to add another good vet or two, particularly at first base because Woody Landry has never played past Double-A. There's a chance that he's not as good as we think he is right off the bat, and I think Trey Mancini could be a solid guy. He's probably not as good as, say, Rowdy Tellez is, but he's probably going to be cheaper. He's been a steady starter with the Orioles, Astros, and Cubs over the last decade or so. And I think for a 1-year, $4 million deal, he's a guy who can always start at first base or DH if needed, and he can be the first baseman until Woody Landry is ready. I like our starting rotation the way it is. I don't think we need to add another starter. We have enough guys competing for the back-end spots anyway, but I would like to add to the bullpen. Jordan Hicks has been a phenomenal signing, but other than that, we did not have a lot of consistency in the pen last year, and I think the bullpen overall was one of our biggest weaknesses, which is unfortunate because I always like to build around the bullpen. Lucas Sims from the Reds, I think, would be a good addition. He's a player who I strongly thought about trading for last year at the deadline. I couldn't get a deal done with Cincinnati. But he's coming off a career year, and since we didn't get him at the deadline, why not just get him here without having to give up good prospects? So we're going to give him a 2-year deal for $9.5 million, and we're also going to look at Liam Hendriks with the White Sox. There's a lot of really good closers in here, so why not go after a guy like Liam Hendriks, who's proven to be very, very good. Over the last 6 years, he has not had an ERA higher than 2.81. In 4 years with the White Sox, his ERA has been in the 2s. With the A's, his ERA was in the 1s. He's been one of the most consistent closers in all of baseball over the last half-decade plus. So we're going to give him a 1-year deal for $10 million, which is more than what the White Sox are bidding. So hopefully he comes to his senses and realizes Miami's a cooler place to live than Chicago. So these are going to be the 4 players that we offer here at the beginning of free agency. Along with that, I added Victor Caratini. He's hopefully going to be our new backup catcher for next year, and then some minor league contracts in there as well. So with that, I think it is time to simulate. Let's take a look at the first month or so of free agency, take a look at who signs with us, and what the big signings around the rest of the league are. So Hayden Jean would ultimately accept our deal to be the farm director. Tommy Lasorda is now the third base coach, so we have our staff filled. The Braves are going to offer us a deal. I'm a little bit weary about doing business with Atlanta because their front office is really, really good. They're offering us Owen Murphy, a good pitching prospect for Brian De La Cruz. Not terrible, but no. Lucas Sims accepts a 2-year deal with the Guardians for less money, so he unfortunately will not be joining our bullpen. Instead, he would rather live in Ohio, which is weird because he's lived in Ohio for the last 6 years. Why would he want to go back? I've pissed off people who live in Chicago and Ohio in the last 2 minutes. Not ideal. The Braves would again offer us for Brian De La Cruz. They really want him, and they're going to offer us Vaughn Grissom, who's a really good young shortstop. In terms of value, this is a great deal for us. But I would rather keep De La Cruz around. He was an all-star for us last season. We need outfield more than we need middle infield, so I'm going to say no. Now we're going to start to get some free agent signings in, and we're going to start with a bang. Juan Soto, 10 years, $324 million with the Philadelphia Phillies. Soto is back in the NL East. He's teammates with Bryce Harper again. Where have I seen this? And the Phillies are not done. They're going to sign Walker Buehler as well. The Phillies are going all in. Their roster is going to be scary. Shane Bieber signs for 7 years with the Cubs for a massive deal, $245 million. Pete Alonso signs with the Braves on a ridiculously cheap contract, so he's going to jump ship from the Mets to the rival Braves, staying in the NL East, signing for a complete bargain. The Braves are just winning at life. Again, this is all they do. Atlanta will lose A.J. Minter, though. He signs for 6 years with the St. Louis Cardinals. They're also going to lose Mike Soroka, who signs a big deal with the Arizona Diamondbacks. Good for him, coming off those Achilles injuries. He's now getting an $81 million deal. We have made it to the month of December. Most of the guys we offered contracts to have accepted, other than Liam Hendriks and Travis Swaggerty. Everybody else has either accepted or, in the case of Lucas Sims, declined. So we've now got all the other guys that we are looking for. There's no other offers that are new for Hendricks and Swaggerty, and we now have Santander, Mancini, and Caratini officially on the roster. I wouldn't mind adding another reliever. There are still some good closers here, but I think I'd rather get a younger option through the trade market a little bit later rather than a vet. Corbin Burnes signed 6 years, $200 million with the San Francisco Giants. A Burnes divorce with the Brewers has been pending for a while. Now it happens. Max Fried signs with the Boston Red Sox for a pretty cheap deal, 5 years, $90 million. Liam Hendriks officially accepts. That's good news, so he is now with our team. And now we've got some draft stuff to cover, and that'll start with the 2024 MLB Draft Lottery. They just put the draft lottery into the game like 2 or 3 days ago, so I'm excited to see how this goes. We have the 15th odds for the number 1 pick, which is at around 0.6%. So we're going to simulate the lottery and see what happens. Obviously, the draft lottery is always a spectacle whenever we do an offseason in an NBA 2K series. And unfortunately for us, we did not really move up. The New York Mets, who had the 11th projected pick, move all the way to 1. So the Mets will get the first pick, all because we beat them in 2 meaningless games at the end of the year. That stings. The Royals and Pirates each move up 2 spots, while the A's and Rockies go down quite a bit. And then the biggest losers are the Washington Nationals, who drop from 2 all the way to 7. The Tigers, Reds, White Sox, and Diamondbacks also drop as well. So the Mets now have the top pick in the draft, which is really coming at a perfect time for them with losing Scherzer, Verlander, and Alonso. It looks like they could be starting a little rebuild for themselves. I feel like everybody in our division is having such a good offseason. The Phillies added Soto and Buehler. The Braves added Pete Alonso, albeit they lost a lot of pitching. The Mets got the number 1 pick, and the Nationals kind of suck. So I feel like we kind of need to make a little bit of a splash now to try to keep up with everybody in the division. Our first opportunity to make a splash is the Rule 5 draft. Realistically, there's not going to be anyone who's good enough to really call a splash, but maybe we can add a nice piece for the team. Sir Anthony Dominguez was on a 4-year deal with the Twins, so he's now out of the division. I guess that's cool. And then Clay Holmes signs with the Detroit Tigers. So that'll bring us to the Rule 5 draft. We've got 2 open spots on the 40-man roster. The draft order is based on the standings, not the draft lottery, so the A's still have the number 1 pick. A few guys ended up going off the board, but as you can see here, the draft board is not all that good. I looked at some of these relievers like Gordon Graceffo and Addison Barrera. I also looked at Jalen Miller, a player we are familiar with on the channel. He was in our Orioles series back in MLB The Show 21. But there was nobody I really wanted to pick. When you select someone in the Rule 5 draft, they will stay on your MLB roster all year, and I don't know if there's anybody who's truly MLB caliber available for us to pick who would have really been a big help. So now we're going to simulate a couple months into the winter. This is certainly the dead point of the offseason. Tyler O'Neill signs with the A's. Luis Castillo gets traded to the Orioles for a big package of prospects headlined by Bo Terry, a very good pitching prospect who was drafted in the 2nd round last year. And then Andres Munoz traded in division from the Mariners to the Rangers for a couple of prospects, specifically Brock Porter. Longtime Astro Alex Bregman signs with the Diamondbacks. They did bring back Jose Altuve, though. And so now we're in February. The free agency class is a lot worse. We are now going through arbitration hearings. The arbitration panel mostly sided with the players over the organization, which means we have to pay them a little bit more money, which isn't ideal, but it's not really the end of the world. It's not like we're really running in on our budget or anything. We actually still have a payroll under $100 million, which could change now that we are going to make some moves on the trade market. I usually wait until the end of the offseason to really go out and make my moves. And as I said, I kind of want to make a little bit of a splash. I like the roster the way it is, but are we going to be able to really compete with the Braves and Phillies next year? Probably not. I wouldn't mind adding a starter. I wouldn't mind adding a reliever or a position player. I just want some talent. I put Joe Mack and Jordan Groshans in the trade finder, and we got some really interesting deals, including Bo Bichette from the Blue Jays, and then Augustin De La Cruz, the player I wanted to draft last year from the Royals. But those two teams would not realistically do those deals, so we're not going to do them. Some other players I looked at include Randy Arozarena from the Rays. The problem is they don't really have a replacement for him on the roster. I looked at Casey Mize from Detroit. He's coming off a really good season. They do have a lot of good young pitchers in the system, but I think they'd rather stick it out with Mize after the season he had. I think Camilo Doval with the Giants would be a lot more realistic of an option, especially considering he's coming off a pretty bad season last year. Doval was the closer and then was demoted. He pitched a lot less last year, and when he did pitch, he wasn't all that good. He had a negative WAR, he was super inconsistent, but he's still a really good young reliever who we are familiar with here on the channel. For those of you who were here for the Guardians franchise last year, we had him in the bullpen with Emmanuel Clase. Those two were a filthy duo. So we're going to be trading quite a bit here. The first piece being Joe Mack, the catcher. I like Joe Mack as a prospect, but I don't know how much better he's going to get, and he has not been able to hit the ball at AAA. Jordan Groshans is a solid shortstop prospect, probably the best piece we're giving away here. I do think he will get a lot better, but the middle infield's crowded. And then we're also trading JT Chargois to replace Doval in the bullpen. We'll also be adding Luca De La Cruz and JP Sears, two C potential prospects who aren't super exciting, but good organizational depth. Obviously, Doval is the big get here. I think he can be our long-term closer. We have Liam Hendricks and Jordan Hicks, but both of them are free agents at the end of the year. I'm going to be trading Anthony Bender away to open up that spot in the bullpen. So we'll be getting two prospects from the Blue Jays. The first one being Adrian Leone. If you guys remember, this was the player we almost drafted over Woody Landry. What a mistake that would have been. Thankfully, we made the right choice, and the Blue Jays are now realizing he's kind of a bust. So maybe we can fix Leone into potentially a good player down the line. We'll also be getting Walker Turley. He was kind of a late-round pick of theirs this past season, so not really much we're getting, but still two decent enough prospects. So those are going to be our trades. Before we wrap up today's episode, though, I do want to go over the international free agent signings. These are these custom-made subscriber players by you guys down in my Discord server. The link for that is in the description. 30 players were randomly selected. I have over 100 submissions of players, so if your player was not selected, just realize there's not a whole lot I could have done. It was totally random. So here is the montage. Most teams got one player. A couple teams got two players, and a couple teams got none. That's because I lost track of which teams got which players, so we're going to kind of have to go with it. We're going to be starting with the pitchers. Got some pretty good names here. The name to certainly watch is relief pitcher Karsten Kofod from Denmark. He signed with the Braves because, of course, the Braves just get all the talent. And then here are the rest of the pitchers. Jose Urias with the Padres is a pretty good player. Now looking at the position players. Chase Gentry with the Twins is going to be a really intriguing prospect. He's got a really good bat for a catcher. Got a number of solid first basemen, including Tito Taquito, who signed with the St. Louis Cardinals. Charo Falcone was one of the best international free agent players. He ended up signing with the Baltimore Orioles. He could be a major league contributor as soon as this season for them. We had a lot of good third basemen and shortstops, including Zaire Singh with the Blue Jays. Tito Ulysses with the Brewers is going to be a complete monster. The shortstop class was headlined by 77 overall Jordan Clove. He ended up signing with the Chicago White Sox. He's a guy who could be a major league contributor right away. And then the two best prospects in the entire class, at least in terms of long-term potential, were both in the outfield. There were a bunch of really good outfielders here, but the two names to really watch include Edsel Escobedo. He has 98 potential, ended up signing with the San Francisco Giants. And Mako Valladolid has 99 potential. He ended up signing with the Diamondbacks. Those are the two highest international free agent potential players we have had so far in the series. Our Marlins signed one international free agent, and that's going to be first baseman Oswaldo Matias from Venezuela. He's a 21-year-old lefty. He hits for pretty good power, improving contact. Obviously, we already have Woody Landry, who is going to most likely be the long-term first baseman, but it never hurts to add guys who can swing the bat, and Oswaldo Matias can swing the bat. He'll be in the minors for a couple years. He is a little bit raw, but I do like his long-term upside. So that'll bring us into spring training. We still have two open spots on the 40-man roster, and I do want to have a full 40-man going into spring training. So Ryan Poles will get the first spot. He's a pretty MLB-ready player, our third-round pick last year out of Hofstra. And then we're going to give the second spot to Khalil Watson. He's pretty close to being a big leaguer, so I figured why not give him an opportunity to face off against big league pitching. So this is what the lineup against righties will look like going into spring training. Obviously, the big storyline will be if Woody Landry can get an opening day roster spot. We've got a lot of the younger players playing against righties, and then against lefties, we have most of our regular big leaguers. That's because, again, a lot of our everyday players struggle against lefties, so I figured it wouldn't hurt to give them, the extra spring training month of reps to play against left-handed pitching. Sandy Alcantara and Edward Cabrera will not be in the rotation to start. The other guys will be competing for the spots, and we're also going to have Gennaro Miller and Max Meyer start some games as well. And then eventually we're going to have some of these guys at the bottom who are not scheduled to pitch early, pitch later in spring training just so they can get loose before the start of the season. So that'll wrap up today's episode. Let me know what you thought of the offseason down below in the comments. Overall, I thought it was really successful. We were able to certainly make the roster better, and I'm really excited about this team going into season number 3. Hopefully this can be the year that we can get a playoff spot, although it's going to be a major challenge in an NL East with the Braves and Phillies who look like legit World Series contenders. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out.